As we transition to the high school ranks, this is the message that I have for this position group and pretty much all the others. If nothing else for the class of 26 for the Noles, they have to reestablish themselves as a prominent program within the Sunshine State. It's not that Florida State doesn't get good players from inside the state of Florida, but they need to do an even better job. Again, it's not like they collapsed, but they need to be more at the forefront, even better with getting guys on campus and even better at getting guys to come to games than they have been in the past. I think the staff has improved overall with recruiting. So with that, here are some of the key guys that I want to talk about. And it's not in a particular order, but for Florida, I'm going to do a few kids from Georgia. These are elite players. Most of these kids have not only been offered by Florida State at one point, but numerous offers, UF, Georgia, Ole Miss, stuff like that. These are really good football players, so these aren't random guys by any means. They're ranked on On3, Rivals, 24/7, ESPN, etc. First guy that I want to talk about is a player that you could argue is the most important recruit for Florida State in the class of 26, regardless of position or state or anything else. Trenton Henderson. He's from Catholic in Pensacola. He is a pure edge rusher, offers galore. Name a school. They probably have offered him. He's a very twitchy kid, 6'4", and just reminds me so much in terms of his style. I'm not saying he's going to end up being this good, but one of my all-time favorite players at Florida State is Peter Boulware. Played in the mid-90s, was a first-round pick of the Ravens, was an outside linebacker, pass rusher for the Ravens for a while. Just a tremendous player. He's one of the best pass rushers in the history of college football. This kid's frame's similar. When Peter came out of high school from the state of South Carolina before he enrolled at FSU, he was about 215 pounds. Henderson's similar in size. He's got the long legs like Peter did, and he's got a really good first step burst. He lines up in a 7 technique wide quite a bit and comes off the edge. I have no idea where he's going, but at the same time, Auburn and Ole Miss and Florida State, again, it's all over the place. With Pot Roast now on campus, Tony White now being the defense coordinator, how quickly does Florida State get him back on campus? How quickly are they able to get him convinced that this can be the place for him? This is a guy that can play early, very, very early, and he's a panhandle kid. Florida State, as I've noted recently in other pods talking about recruiting and whatnot, they got to get more guys from the greater Panhandle and South Georgia, what I would like to call the Bobby Bowden stronghold. That's where they built their program. Georgia kids, North Florida, and then they would, they'd get a kid from Atlanta. They would get a kid from D.C. and, of course, South Florida, maybe one kid from New Orleans or whatever, and maybe a kid from Houston, and their class was done. But they got the bulk of their kids from within about a 250-mile radius that were really good. And they beat Florida. They beat Miami. They beat Michigan. They beat Georgia. They beat Notre Dame. They beat LSU. They beat prominent programs for those players. Florida State's got to do that. Henderson's a great start. With that in mind, there are several other really good defensive linemen. And let's talk about Elijah Golden. He's at Mooney High School. That is in Sarasota. He was originally at IMG. He's a kid that's growing into his body. He's going to be 300-pounder, I think, possibly by the time he's done. Interior defensive lineman, very talented, still raw. I'm curious to see what Florida State does with a guy like this, how they would pitch him. Is it going to be nose guard? Is it going to be strong side end? I could see either. Maybe it's a combination. But he's a player that every school in the country had pretty much offered by the end of his sophomore year. And he's getting ready to end up finishing up his junior season. Elijah Golden is a great kid, too. This guy I've met with several times. Another kid from the Panhandle, if you're going to talk about pass rushers, he's just athletically so gifted. I don't know exactly how he would be used in Florida State's defense, but my guess is he would end up playing James Williams' spot. He's right around 200 pounds right now. That's Jarius Rodgers. Plays at Fleming Island. There's a certain running back that is from that high school that's on Florida State's roster that had a 95-yard kickoff return this past year too. So that's Fleming Island, by the way. It's just outside of Jacksonville. So again, Panhandle, Florida State's always recruited that area well. You have to get kids like this. And to be honest, he's taken several visits to Florida State, even during this past season when they were struggling. He has a sincere interest in the Noles. If they don't get Trenton Henderson, they definitely need to get Rod. They need to get at least one of the two. I think that's kind of the safe Safe way to put it. When we come back, we're going to talk more defensive line for Florida State recruiting. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can finish the regular season with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet hits. FanDuel has so many different ways for you to place a bet. You can bet on player props, you can bet on over-unders, you can bet on team totals. It's up to you. Even something as simple as how many touchdowns a wide receiver scores. That's how you choose to do it. Just visit FanDuel.com today. That's FanDuel.com to get your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Florida State needs defensive linemen in the class of 26. As we continue on, there's an unusual theme here. There's more players from Southwest Florida than usual. One of them is Kendall Gerville, 6'4", 265. He went to Miami's camp this past year, but again, Florida State and numerous other programs offered him. He's at Fort Myers High. That program has gotten a lot better recently. One of his teammates I actually talked about the other day, an offensive tackle. Good program that Florida State definitely needs to recruit. And while I'm on that point, there's another guy from that area that this is really unusual, thinking about all the different guys that they've had in that area. James Johnson, 6'2", 260 pounds. He's from North Fort Myers. That's a program, by the way, that Deion Sanders went to. So obviously Florida State has history at that school. He's got a ton of offers. Another guy from that area, and another IMG guy by way of Indianapolis, would fit the nose guard role pretty well. I've met him, Cameron McHenry, great kid. Played at Indianapolis Lutheran before going to IMG this past year. Big body guy, 6'1", 6'2", 310 pounds, something like that. He gets off the snap really well. I'm curious, does Florida State want taller, longer guys like Darrell Jackson always to play nose? Or are they going to spread it out a little bit and look at different players? McHenry will have offers galore because you can't teach the size. All the schools from the Midwest are going to offer him. That's a really interesting player. Staying in the same area again, Venice High School just won state title. Speed rusher, Ashari Charles. He's a little bit similar to Peter Boulware, kind of like I mentioned some of the other guys, but not quite as tall, 6'1", 6'2". But man, that first step quickness, Charles got it. You can't have a defense without pass rushers like that. Maybe he's a guy Florida State would like. Maybe he wouldn't. Again, I'm not exactly sure how pot roast and the defensive front is going to be set up from him. That's interesting, though, because some teams will only take guys with a certain height if they run that outside linebacker position like a jack or whatever that they call it. I'm curious because Charles, despite not being the tallest guy in the world, he's shot out of a cannon. And he's played against good competition and knows what it's like to be coached because Venice has one of the best high school coaching staffs inside the Sunshine State. At IMG, another 300-pounder, 6'4", 300 pounds, is Preston Carey. That's a kid that's originally from the state of New York. He plays with his hair on fire. He's just an all-out effort guy, very strong, and he's pretty darn quick in space for a 300-pounder. I was a little bit surprised, to be honest, when he gets past the blocker, how he can change direction and run down a quarterback, running back, or get involved on a reverse. That's a kid that is very athletic, and I'd seen him a little bit at IMG, but watching his junior film, he's taken to the coaching there, and tip of the cap to him for doing so. Also, in the North Florida area, one more player to mention, Brian Harris. He's at Mandarin. Just keep that name in mind. Again, panhandle. From Jacksonville to Pensacola, Florida State must do a good job. And I know that you can call it the panhandle if you want. But Jacksonville, it's its own entity because it's got good players. But from that I-10 corridor, if you will, it's just so important that Florida State gets some more of these guys. I'm curious to see if they can get in on him. Moving to the state of Georgia, you could make an argument if Florida State was going to sign anybody from Georgia this next year, it's also a defensive lineman. Ironically, he is committed to Southern Cal. I don't expect that to last. He's at Gainesville High, a little bit northeast of the city of Atlanta. Shot out of a cannon is another nice way to put it. 210, 220 pounds. Xavier Griffin. If you have not heard his name, you will. He will be a very, very highly coveted recruit. I'm not curious. I'm just fascinated, honestly, to see how his visits line up, Florida State included, because there won't be a school in the country that doesn't offer it. He has a chance to end up as the top player in the country. He's certainly among that group. And quite honestly, guys like him, especially in today's passing era, you just can't have enough of them. Trenton Henderson, him, Rodgers. Florida State's got some guys that are elite players within their realm. They've got to get some of these guys to come off the edge instead of relying on the portal. You're not going to get a James Williams every year. They got lucky this season. He was at Nebraska. They got a really good football player, but we're talking about a situation with Griffin. If they could add him, he's the guy that will come in and play some. He would certainly take some of the load off some of the other guys. Tristan Givens, that's a guy I know personally. He's at Carver in Columbus. Ironically, he's a great athlete to the point where he plays receiver. Florida State and everybody else, Auburn, Georgia, all these schools are going to be after him. Great kid, very humble, plays 100 mile an hour, good student, 6'4", 215, another guy that's built pretty much similar to what Boulware was. You're not going to find many guys like him in terms of his mental makeup, though. Really excited to see what Givens does soon. Back up to the northern Atlanta area, Buford High School. When do they not have a big-time recruit? Bryce Perry-Wright, defensive lineman. I've met him before on a visit when he was at Auburn. He's like 280. Massive guy, 6'3". He's probably going to be a power end in a Florida State defense at a 3.35. There's no telling where he's going to end up. Auburn, Georgia, etc. Elite recruit. He fits the profile, broad shoulders, big chest. He is born to play in the 3.35. Like, I could just see him playing nose guard part of the time on pass rushing downs, strong side end, some others. That's a really good player. Douglas County, just west of Atlanta. That's where Jordan Carter plays. He's a kid that could end up being your weak side end in the down position. He's 240 or so now. Douglas County is one of the best players or one of the best schools in the state of Georgia. They do a tremendous job. Ernest Rankins, another guy from the Atlanta area, this time on the east side at Southwest DeKalb. He's also got that size that fits for the 3.35. He's 6'6", 285. Keep that name in mind. Ernest Rankins. Can't find many guys with that kind of height to play in this defense, so he's an important recruit for Florida State to look at. And then finally, a guy that I know really, really well because I've been down there a few times, Cam Brooks, Thomas County Central, just north of Tallahassee. He was 30 minutes away. Florida State is a school that's recruited him hard. He's a great guy. He gets after it and can rush the passer. I'm not sure exactly where he would line up for Florida State. I think he could play either of the down positions long term. He was 244, 245 right around there at the beginning of this past season. But just look at him as a guy that's so athletic. You get him on campus and figure out later. Georgia, Florida State, Auburn, everybody's after him. Cam Brooks is a very, very good football player. That's going to wrap up this edition of Locked On Seminoles. And I want to thank each and every one of you once again for making this your first listen each and every day. I truly appreciate you stopping in to talk some Noles with me. I will be back again over the next several days with updates from the Under Armour camp. Tomorrow is my travel day. I may or may not get a podcast in. That's a long drive down to Orlando, but there will be more updates coming. I appreciate you stopping in, and everybody have a good weekend.